And I guess one of the first places that I wanted to touch on with you, Mike, is that look, we've come in a very unique situation with this world right now, and athletes have taken months and months and months off training, or it's been dysregulated. They haven't hit the same volumes, they haven't hit the same intensities, a lot of them. And I don't know if you recall, but in 2011 in the NFL lockout, we had this huge spike in Achilles tendon ruptures. And I suspect that we're going to see this pretty large spike in injuries for the athletes who weren't prepared. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen? And what do you think a lot of the athletes can do now to kind of prepare for that?
Well, one, I think you're right. I'm going to try to pivot a little bit here to see if I can get a little better.
I love that American flag. That's beautiful.
Yeah. There's the sun is affecting me. I'm trying to be someplace where I won't wake everybody up in the morning. But I think you're right. I think there probably will be a spike in injuries. The one thing I will say is that there's been a lot more talk on social media consistently about people trying to be more careful when they come back. So I think that may help mitigate this to some degree, just because it's, people are almost constantly saying, remember that, people haven't been training or haven't been training as much. And I don't remember that. I don't even think, like, if you said 2011, I mean, I'm not sure if there was this really active group of strength and conditioning people on Twitter or on Instagram or in a lot of places where you are kind of able to at least influence the conversation a little bit.
Yeah.
But with that said, do I think there'll be a problem? Yes. How can athletes mitigate that? The number one thing, get out and run. And get out and run fast, because I think a lot of the problem that you see is that, particularly with higher level athletes, I don't think anybody really likes the conditioning stuff that they need to do. And I think that it's very easy to go in the weight room and lift weights and tell yourself you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's not maybe so easy to get out on the field and do the type of running workouts that you need to do. Make sure you're doing your plyos, make sure you're doing your short sprints, make sure you're doing some sort of interval training. Because that stuff is, it's a little harder. It takes a little more work. It takes a little more effort. It's a little bit more uncomfortable. There's a lot of ifs in there. Whereas the weight room, I hate to say the weight room's easy, but the weight room's easy. Everybody likes the weight room. Everybody likes to go there, especially it's off season. I use the expression, it's like, in season weight room is like going to the dentist. Nobody wants to go. You go because you need to go. Whereas off-season weight room, I wrote an article one time called "The Dentist and the Ice Cream Man." I said in some days, like during the off-season, I'm the ice cream man. Everybody can't wait to see me. Everybody can't wait to get there. He's coming. This is great. And then you get to in-season lifting, and people are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I got to go in there. I'm sore. I'm tired. We have meetings, all this other stuff going on." So, I think it's really we don't see it with people that follow their program. If you do what you are supposed to do, you're probably not going to get injured. If you skimp, particularly, like I said, we're big on 100% sprinting. And we do a lot of, 10-yard, flying 10-yard. We rarely sprint over 25 yards, but we do a lot of sprinting and time sprinting in that sort of somewhere between 10 and 25 yard area. And when you think about, particularly when you allude to Achilles tendon ruptures, you're talking about load and speed. And you have to apply load and you have to apply speed. And if you don't apply either or, that's where you're going to get in trouble, because the bad thing about professional athletes is they're like high performance sports cars in terms of their 100% is very, very high. If they're not accessing that 100% on a consistent basis, they will access that in practice settings. And then that's where some of these, particularly the tendon ruptures, are going to occur, when somebody who has not been applying appropriate kind of load speed continuum to their body. Right.
Do you think, so to summarize, then it sounds like, well, the strength and conditioning, the weight room, that is the easiest stuff to sell most of the time for you. But you're talking about more of the track work on, like, outside of the gym. How do you communicate that to your athletes and kind of make it really digestible so they can go implement, straight away and effectively?
We have no choices. So one of the things that we do, you either are doing the workout or you're not. And I talk about the idea that the workout is basically a recipe, not a menu. You don't get to go in and pick. You go to a restaurant, you look at a menu, there's a lot of stuff on the menu, and I'll have one of these, I'll have one of these. I always, when people, the people that I criticize, I call them menu pickers, because they go in and they're like, oh yeah, there's 8 things on the menu today. I'll have these 2. I'll have bench press and, maybe some squats. Okay. And then I'm good. Whereas we look at it and think this is a recipe, and the recipe starts with tissue preparation. It starts with foam rolling. It starts with stretching. It goes through dynamic warm up. It goes into speed and power and plyo work. So when we're writing our workouts, it's like I said, either you're doing the workout or you're not. And there really is no in between there, because I don't, and it sounds almost a little communist, but I don't like choices. I want there to be no choice at all. This is today's workout. This is what you're supposed to do. Either you did it or you didn't do it. So in terms of, like, if someone's asking me for advice, I'm like, my advice is do the workout. It's not complicated advice. Do the workout as written, in the order it was written. The same way when we talk about recipe, when you're creating food, you get a recipe, and the order that the ingredients go in matters. You can't simply say, oh, I'm going to change the order. You change the order, you change the meal. And in a lot of situations, you probably ruin it in terms of,
what do you think the biggest mistakes people make? Like, and what we're alluding to, I think what you're alluding to is exercise order and how that influences the whole systemic program. What do you think trainers and coaches make the biggest mistakes with that? The menu, changing the menu, if you will.
I think that they don't look at it as, that's why I said, that was why I wrote the article. They don't look at it and realize that it is a system. It's not, you know what I mean? Like, and I can keep saying I have all these articles, because, one of the things I talk about, another article that I wrote, and I can't think of the name, but we talked about the idea of, when you have somebody who's a cook but thinks they're a chef. And, you got to know, if you're a cook, you're a cook. If you're a chef, like, I consider myself at this point, I'm at the chef stage of life. So I can be a little bit more creative. If you're a cook, just follow the recipe that's written by a chef. Don't, the biggest mistake that coaches make is they start thinking, oh, I'll do this. I'll do this. I'm doing actually a webinar this Friday for an event in Germany, and it's about the updates on our athlete program. And one of the things that I talk about is, people are always like, oh, Mike, I love your stuff. I love your stuff. Yeah, I combine your stuff with, like, Martin Rooney's stuff, and, some stuff from this guy and some stuff from that guy. And I'm like, well, you don't really love my stuff then. Because if you're combining it, then you're one of these hack cooks who's just throwing a bunch of shit in a pot. I'd call it shit soup. You make shit soup. That's what you do. You got to have a system. And the system means A to B to C to D to E, like right through. It has to follow all the time. If it doesn't, then I won't be surprised when it blows up in your face and somebody gets hurt.
Right. No, 100%. You got to be systemized. You got to be intelligent in your approach. But do you think that system is created and influenced by multiple different, really strong minds from a diverse amount of fields?
Well, I think yes, and I think that's what we've done. And that's, I guess, my point is, if you haven't done that, you need to know when you're going to try. And that's, like we said, the article, oh my God. Oh, it was called Stick to the Recipe. I couldn't think of the article. The article was called Stick to the Recipe. And it basically said that, if you look at the kitchen, there's like line cook, sous chef, chef. That's how the kitchen works. When you're a line cook, you just make what you're supposed to make. When you're a sous chef, you help the chef. You're in that sort of in between. And then at some point you're the chef and you're deciding what's on the meal, what's on the menu. Our problem is we got too many line cooks who think they're chefs. So we have people who think, oh yeah, I'm combining stuff from all the best minds, but you're like, yeah, but the order's wrong. You haven't, as you said, there's just so many things, when you look at people, and I talk about the same kind of tired topics all the time, but we have a great tendency in our field to train to our biases. We do what we like to do. And then everybody does what we like to do. I use the Bud Light and chocolate chip ice cream analogy. I like Bud Light beer and I like chocolate chip ice cream. And so if I get put in charge of nutrition for the world, should I feed everybody beer and chocolate chip ice cream?
Right.
But in strength and conditioning, we have a lot of what I would call the Bud Light and chocolate chip ice cream people, in terms of, their power lifters or their Olympic lifters or their bodybuilders or their CrossFitters or their kettlebell people, whatever it is. And you look at their program, and that's what their program is. and everybody's getting the Bud Light chocolate chip ice cream version of training. Whereas I said, I look at, we've spent 38 years developing a system. And as you said, it's the best minds. It's looking at rehab. It's looking at strength and conditioning. It's looking at track and field. It's looking at every dimension of this and saying, how does each dimension affect what we're trying to do? But it's the ability in a very chef-like manner to combine those ingredients and to know, okay, is it just a pinch of track and field, or is it, 2 scoops of track and field? You know what I mean? Like, what's the difference here? And, is it a little bit of Olympic lifting, or is it a huge heaping helping of Olympic lifting? And so it's that ability to balance all those things and to make, the perfect meal, the perfect workout where you're able to get it done.
I think that is such an art to it, right? You're 38 years, nearly about 40 years in this, and you've developed this system and you've crafted this beautiful foundation that you can attack and develop any human to their peak potential. But I think for a lot of, like Orphic, we're an education company. We coach trainers and teach trainers, certify them to be trainers and coaches. And I think it can be so overwhelming, right? Seeing all these different minds like yourself, right? The DeFrancos, this guy, that guy, right? How do you even teach the young trainers and young coaches that you see how to think and aggregate all this overwhelming information?
Well, that's why we developed we have our own certification, certified functional strength coach. And what you're literally trying to do is, we have so many things. Like I said, there's so many simple things. We always talk about the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. The reality is, it is not very difficult. When you think, if you have them think systematically, okay, I bring somebody into the gym, what should I do? Well, I probably should get them ready to work out, right? That's pretty simple. I don't think anybody with half a brain is not going to argue with you about that. If you said, hey, let's do some preparation to get ready for what we're going to do in the course of the workout. Then you start looking and saying, okay, well, what constitutes preparation to me? When I look at preparation, I think, I go back to the Shirley Simon quote. Well, what I really want is the right muscles moving the right joints at the right time. So I need to make sure that my length tension relationships are appropriate. And that means foam rolling, getting the muscle tissue prepared for what's going to come next. And then that means, and like for us, we stretch. People stretching has gone out of style. A lot of people are very anti-stretching and they're more pro-dynamic warm-up. But we stretch prior to our dynamic warm-up because, again, I want appropriate length tension relationships. If I don't have the right length tension relationship, then I don't have joint centration. I don't have things working the way they're supposed to. So when I go into my, like we would call our warm-up, activation, mobility, a lot of people would look at that and say, oh, you're doing your core work first. And I'm like, yeah, I guess. That's core work, when we think about warm-up. But
it's going to help. It's not made to hinder. Right.
Right. And it's just made to what you're really trying to do. I liken it to having a dimmer switch. Like if the room you're sitting in has a dimmer switch right now and you decide, hey, I want the lights on really bright, then you've got to go over and turn that dimmer switch up. And so when we start the workout, I want things on really bright. So I'm going to use these mobility and activation exercises to upregulate the system. And then once I get that done, like, okay, I've got everything. I've got tissue quality right. I've got tissue length right. I've got sort of tissue innervation right. I've got the right muscles working, on. And I don't like the on-off idea because, people will argue with you. Muscles are never on or off, which is true. But the upregulation idea, I do believe in. I need to get somebody to think, that I got to get their glutes working. I got to get their glutes doing the right thing. I got to get the hamstrings doing the right thing. There's just all of these like kind of buttons I got to push before I'm ready to work out. Then we're going to move into our dynamic warm-up stuff. So now we're going to start, again, getting ready. Like our getting ready process takes a third of the workout time. So if I've got a personal training session that takes an hour, I'm going to take 20 minutes getting ready.
That's so foreign to so many people. I mean, some people do it, but it's like 20 minutes. It's like you got to prepare if you want to produce force maximally and recruit and innovate nervous system efficiently. Can you break that down on like why you think preparation time is so important and why you do 15, 20-minute preparation warm-ups?
Um, it's for exactly the reasons that I said. Like, I look at people now and think it's amazing to me that people walk in the weight room and start lifting. Like, I
Right,
look at that and think, no wonder everybody's hurt. No wonder
right,
everybody's got shoulder problems and back pain and all these things that they've got, because they're not doing it's like, I always, like I said, I love really dumb analogies or really simplistic analogies. But, if I said to you, here, what I want you to do is I just want you to get in your car, start it. And then I just want you to try to go 90 miles an hour as fast as you can. Just pull out of your driveway, stomp the pedal, go as hard as you can. And I think anybody would look and think, oh, that's not really good for the car, right? You're like, yeah, it's not good for the car. And the body's the same way. Like, you've got to have that ramp up period. And some people use, the ramp as an acronym for the warm up. We don't, but it's an effective one sometimes, because you want that period of literally preparation. It's because the workout's important, but what's important is that the workout is done correctly. Like I said, if you think about these ideas of the right muscles moving the right joints at the right time, joints being centrated, joints, particularly shoulder joints, hip joints, the balls need to be in the sockets the right way. And for most people, again, as we age, the balls are moving anteriorly in the sockets. Our shoulders are moving anteriorly, and we're not as aligned in terms of that, scapulohumeral connection isn't where it should be. Our hips are doing the same thing. We look at all the problems that we have, and we know that the problems are, they're consistent. Let's put it that way. Back pain, shoulder pain, neck pain, everybody's got the same pains. So we should be looking and saying, because the difference too, if, say I'm a personal trainer, my job as a personal trainer is not to give someone a workout. My job as a personal trainer is to make that person feel better. And I think that's the difference that we miss out on. People think my job is to give them a workout. My job is to get them tired. My job is to get them sweaty, whatever it is. And I look at that and think that's a small part of what you're doing. But the bigger part, I always tell my clients, I want my clients looking at me and saying, I feel better when I get up in the morning. The things that used to bother me don't bother me. Like someone said, what do you do if you just got a guy who just wants to get big? I'd probably send him to somebody else. You know what I mean? Like I probably don't bother with that. If someone said, oh, I just want bigger arms, I'm probably not the bigger arms guy. You probably should find some, bodybuilder type trainer who will cater to what you think you need. And then eventually you'll come back to me and say, man, my arms are bigger, but now I got bicep tendonitis and, and I need rotator cuff surgery. And I'm like, yeah, that's because you didn't listen to me the first time around.
Did
And I
you?
always think that's the big advantage to the 38-year thing is that
Yeah.
I've been doing this, when I say I've literally seen it all, I've seen it all, or at least the vast majority.
And when you step back and you look at it all, right, as this, OG in the industry, this might be a question or something you've thought about before, written articles on it, but what do you see as the big pillars, the foundations that kind of stay tried and true in strength and conditioning in this industry?
Lifting weights and doing interval training. Those are probably the big pillars when you really think about it. I mean, people have tried for years to replace weights with all sorts of things, with different machines and with air and with pneumatics and and we always end up back lifting weights. The idea of progressive resistance exercise is one that, it goes back to the Greeks. You think about the story of Milo of Crete and Milo and the bull. I always use that slide when I'm doing presentations in terms of, hey, this, we're not splitting the atom here. This isn't anything new. And same way, interval training, getting out. I don't understand why anybody jogs or anybody does, 20 minutes of cardio. People talk about cardio. I'm like, that's the dumbest idea ever. It makes no sense because it doesn't do it. I always say cardio long, slow distance is good for getting hurt. And that's about it.
Now that statement triggers people, right? So do you want to break that down a little bit on why you think, aerobic training in of itself, long, slow distance is ineffective for you or inefficient?
Well, it's inefficient.
Yeah.
It's inefficient because you can get much more. If you look at studies, like if you look at, Martin Jabala's work, he's at McMaster University in Canada. They've done a bunch of studies where they've shown that 4 minutes of intervals are superior or equal to 20 minutes of steady state, 90 minutes of steady state. The Tabata study showed the same thing, 4 minutes of intervals were, superior or equal to. So that's the inefficiency part. You can spend a huge amount of time doing steady state activity, but if you just did a shorter amount of harder interval training, you would get the same aerobic benefit. The interesting thing about the aerobic system is if you talk to anyone who knows anything about exercise physiology, they will tell you that the best way to develop your aerobic system is via anaerobic training. You won't get that. You won't get an argument from anybody who understands physiology when you say interval training is the best way to improve your aerobic system. So you kind of look and think, well, why do people do so much steady state aerobic work? And I think it's easier, and it's been kind of hammered into our mind, 20 minutes, 80% of maximum heart rate, blah, 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 blah. A lot of these things that are probably at best semi-truths. Then there is the repetitive overuse situation. When you think about aerobic training, particularly let's look at running, the incidence of injury in running is so high that I don't know why anybody does it. When you look at somewhere between 50 and 70% of people who take up a jogging program will get injured. There's nothing else that we would do in the world where someone's actually there is. I'll give you my standard joke in a minute, but I always say, if someone said to you that you had a 50% chance of success, you have 50% chance you're going to get hurt, would you do it? No, but you'd say nobody would do it. But I always joke, but people get married, right? 50%, 50% chance.
Because the risk is worth it for people in their head. They have this big.
But yet 50, at least in the US, like 50% of marriages end up in divorce. 50% of the people who take up running get hurt. And if you look, the runners get really mad at that. That's what he said. It will trigger people. People will look at that and be angry. But if you look at the statistics are there supporting that fact that there's a really high injury rate. So you combine the relatively ineffective, inefficient idea with the higher injury rate, and you think, why would anybody do it? And so I'm saying, I always say that we never jog. We run a lot. And I just think there's a distinction between jogging and running. Jogging is a slow, what I would call a non-sprint motor pattern. Mm-hmm. Running is a sprint motor pattern. Running doesn't have to be 100% speed, but it should look like running. If it looks like jogging, then you're doing it wrong.
Right.
So, and I could go on about any one of these particular topics forever, but
oh yeah, I mean that's your career, that's your life. I mean, diving into these and finding the details in between. I might come back to that topic because there's something else that I wanted to touch on, but in the respective time, I know that so many young trainers, there's never been more S&C coaches and never been more trainers coming through the industry in Australia and America. At least for our end, what do you think are the biggest mistakes that a lot of these young trainers and coaches are making when they enter this industry?
The biggest mistake is they enter this industry because it's all about them. They enter the industry because I like to work out. I like the way I look. I like the gym. I enjoy being there. And that's why you need to enter the industry. And I listened to a podcast with a young coach kid named Cameron Joss. And that was one of the things that he said is that, you go, he's a DeFranco guy, so you're probably familiar with him. He's great. But, and he basically said that, there's two reasons to get in the profession. One is your own insecurity, and the other is a really strong desire to help people. I think a lot of people get into it out of their own insecurity. Like I look at people and think, one of the things, so when I'm looking at hiring coaches or trainers, I look at things and say, if someone said to me, oh, I'm a fitness competitor, or I'm a bodybuilder, or I'm a power lifter, or I'm an Olympic lifter, I consider that to be a negative on your resume. I look at that and think, okay, if you're still into doing something yourself, you're probably not going to be into getting other people better. You're going to be more worried about, when do I get my workout in? When do I get to do my stuff? And in our world, that can't be. Like, you need to be committed to getting, athletes better, getting clients better. That needs to be your life. And I had that conversation last summer with a couple of kids who were, applying for jobs, and they were like, talking about their powerlifting experience. And I'm like, I said, downplay that. If that comes up, great. But I don't consider that to be a strength. I consider that to be a weakness, because I would look at that and think there are going to be times when your ego gets in the way of you making the right decision, or your self-interest gets in the way of you making the right decision. And I always talk about, you can tell people who get into the industry for the wrong reasons just by looking at them most of the time. If you look at someone and, their clothes don't fit, that's a big red flag for me.
Is that a little shot of tight fitting t-shirts, Boyle?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I always said, like, don't look like you're wearing your little brother's clothes. Look like you're wearing your clothes. But, again, but people love, like, yeah, but look at me. Like, I got like unbelievable body. And I'm like, yeah, who cares? Certainly not me, and certainly not most clients. Again, if you're in a big box gym, yeah, maybe they're just, uneducated people who are looking and saying, oh, I want to look like him, or I want to look like her. And that's how they're picking their trainer. But if you want to ever move beyond that point, I think, dress like you have some self-respect, dress like you have some sense of what the world is about. If you walked into the doctor's office and the guy was there in like skin tight shorts and t-shirt, how would you feel? Would you look and think, oh, the doctor's jacked? Or would you be a little weirded out, like, this guy, what's his deal? Like, he's, it's like,
and
showing
how much of that is like social conditioning, right? Of like clothing and like what we learn is
a lot.
acceptable.
That's what I mean. I think the social conditioning in our field is really bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we're not professional. We wonder why we don't get treated like, well, you won't get treated like a professional if you don't dress like a professional, if you don't act like a professional.
Yeah, the act is big. What do you think is the act like? What qualities do you think embody like a truly excellent health and exercise professional?
I mean, one, I would say humility and concern for others, because those are the things that you really need. Like, you need to be humble, and you need to be, like I said, somebody who's really worried. Sorry, I keep trying to pivot around here and find, so the sun's in my eyes. But those are the things that I'm looking for. I keep going back. I wrote an article, but I've written a million articles, but I wrote another one about the most important certification. And I said the most important certification is the CNP, Certified Nice Person. Right? Yeah. That's what I want. When people always rave, I did a podcast the other day for a guy in Hungary, Peter Lakatos, who's does our education, or is our education partner in Hungary. And one of the things that he said was that, wow, your coaches, he said, they're all really young, they're all really good. He said, but the thing that stands out about them is that they're all really nice. And I said, I was so I was like beaming, thinking, wow, this guy, again, recognizes what we're trying to do, what we're trying to get accomplished, because we start out with that idea. We pick coaches. So when we're selecting people, we are selecting people based on personality first. I always say, I can make you smarter, but I can't make you nicer. Do you know what I mean? If you are not a good quality person to begin with, then that's going to make life difficult for everybody. So we end up, we're always, like I said, trying to find, I'm really struggling to find it.
Now it's that sunrise. It's changing every minute.
The sun, it's exactly it.
What state are you in?
I'm in Massachusetts.
Right.
And the sun comes right up in my backyard. Actually, okay, this is much better.
There you go.
Because one, the sun is killing me, and two, I'm looking at myself and a lot of sun shining off my head here. But
that's that.
Yeah. So this idea is that start with personality, and then teach, because you get too many people who, again, they come into it. I know a lot about strength and conditioning. I know a lot about fitness because I work out, that kind of person. That's the average person who's going into personal training. So again, if I'm somebody like you and I'm in the education field, I'm spending a lot of time on personal development. I'm spending a lot of time on professionalism and how professionals look and how professionals act, and trying to get people to realize that if you want to be perceived like a doctor or like a lawyer, you need to act like a doctor or like a lawyer. You know what I mean? And, we're like, I hate to say it, like if you look at, we're like the jacked up, earrings, tattoos, nose rings, all, it's like, people look at that and think, okay, is that the professional that I want? to lead me on this wellness journey that I want to go on. And most of the time it's not. So I think, you know, again, like we always talk about, you know, we have our intern meeting is kind of famous for the, you know, summer intern meeting, and we get through the whole process. You know, I tell them, you know, clothes to fit. I said my shorts policy, you know, if you're a guy, they got to cover the top of your ass. If it's a girl, they got to cover the bottom. You know what I mean? Because, you know, guys walk in and, you know, their pants are down around their knees, and, you know, you're looking and thinking, okay, pull your pants up, you know, look like a professional, get a pair of shorts that fit, you know, and a girl will come in and it might be the reverse in terms of those are too short. Like that's not going to work here. Like you can't, I always said, you know, I don't want to be in a situation where, you know, everybody's looking at you and can't focus on what they're supposed to be doing. But it's that ability to be a professional and to select, like I said, you know, select your clothing. We talk about, I mean, even things like brushing your teeth, you know, body odor, deodorant. I mean, these are all things that come into play. You know, if you're going to be in close contact with people every day, and you're somebody who's not, like, you know, really conscious of their personal hygiene, that's a problem. You've got to make sure, you know, that, you know, your clothes have to fit, your clothes have to be clean, you got to brush your teeth, you know, you know what I mean? And you think, oh, we shouldn't have to say these things, but we have to say these things because, again, over the course of time, we've encountered these problems with people where someone said, oh, I really like Mike, he's a great trainer. Oh, God, he smells like a goat, you know? And it's like, you know, I don't know if I can do it again. And you're like, okay, you know, it's the worst thing is having that conversation, you know, of having to bring somebody in and be like, hey, you know, you gotta shower after your workout. You can't just work out.
How many of those conversations have you had? How do you, because that's an art of communication right there, and not being able to belittle or disrespect, but, you know.
You know, we have a couple every summer. It's hard. I mean, it really is. I mean, you bring somebody in and, you know, you have to start with, you know, hey, I love you. I think you're doing a great job. You know, you're awesome, but we got a problem.
Yeah.
And it is. I mean, you know, the art, you know, difficult conversations are an art. I always say, like, sometimes it's just like, take a deep breath. Okay, here we go. You know, okay, I got to do this, right? I mean, you don't look forward to it. It's not fun. But if you avoid it, you lose clients. And in reality, you do that person a disservice. That person needs to know that, you know, I always tell them, my wife is great that way in terms of, she's like, go brush your teeth.
You
And
need
you know, I
that.
get, like, my first reaction is I'm a little bit offended. I'm like, saying I got bad breath? And she's like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's why I told you to go brush your teeth again. And you know, but it's like getting people to floss. Like, there's nothing worse than spending an hour with someone who has horrible breath. I mean, nothing. I can't imagine any, like, thing that I would like less than saying, okay, I'm going to have to work and talk back and forth with someone for an hour, and their breath is just, you know, offensive, or their odor is offensive. You know what I mean? It's like, these are all the things that they all effectively create this professional appearance that we struggle so much. We wonder why we're not perceived as professionals, but, you know, we don't dress like them, we don't look like them, we don't act like them. And it's like, well, if you don't dress like them, look like them, act like them, why would anybody treat you like one?
That's completely, that makes complete sense, right? You have to be the change you want to see. You have to represent and own the reputation that you want. But what I appreciate and respect about you, Mike, is that you have standards, and your standards and boundaries are very clear, and they're lines in the sand. And I wonder, when you were in your 20s, late 20s, 30s, did you have these same standards? When did these develop? When did this strong-willed
Well, I
boundaries
think
develop?
my father was a high school principal. So I think I've had them my whole life. Like, as a kid, I remember, um, you know, I couldn't wear, you know, whatever your word is, jeans, dungarees. I couldn't wear denim pants to school. That was my father's standard. You don't wear jeans in school. And, you know, I mean, it was a dumb thing, but, you know, my father was like, and you don't get sick. You know what I mean? You know, you get up, you go to school every day. You know, you couldn't get up. Oh, I don't feel good. I don't want to go to school. I don't care. Get up and go to school. Get up, get your clothes on. Let's go. And there were always standards in, you know, kind of in our life. And then I went to I went to Springfield College, a physical education school, and they had very high standards. The physical education curriculum that we took was super rigorous, and that just further instilled in me kind of the value and the need of professionalism. And then I went to Boston University, and it was the same thing. Like, I wanted to be perceived as a professional. And so you realize that, you know, if you want to be perceived as a professional, you've got to act in a professional manner. If you want people, because again, think about the time that I'm doing this. I'm one of the first people in the country who's doing this. There's not a lot of us performing the duties of strength and conditioning coach at that time. And yeah, I mean, it was great. Like, hey, it's still t-shirt and shorts a lot of times at work, but as I said, the idea that things need to fit. But there, I can tell you, in my 20s, I was probably much less professional than I am now. And I think the standards develop over time. You start to see things that you like or that you don't like, and you realize that, okay, these are, you know, in my 20s, I probably, you know, I was, you know, I'd go out for a beer with players. You know, I'd look at that now and think that's absolutely forbidden. Like, you can't do that.
Why do you think that now? Because so one way you might think we're building trust, camaraderie, you know,
Right.
we're getting to know them, but
Yeah.
what's the other side?
I mean, the other side is the ability, you know, maybe you compromising your position with those people by getting, you know, involved in things that, you know, and it's even like now, if someone said, hey, I'm going to go someplace with one of the athletes and I'm going to have 1 or 2 beers, I'd probably be okay with that. You know, if someone said, I'm going to go away for the weekend with them somewhere, you know, and rip it up, I'd be like, I don't know if that's going to be, but there was like, when I started coaching, there were players that were older than I was. When I got into professional sports, there were players that are older than I was. You know, so I think some of that, it develops over time, and some of the rules develop as you see things go awry. You think, okay, these are things that didn't go well. You know, we used to have, you know, like we always tell everybody, you know, like, think about simple rules. You know, you can't date the athletes in the gym. But that rule was a product of me having massive amounts of problems with staff members dating athletes, and then staff members and athletes breaking up, and then people not wanting to be in the group with, you know, I don't want to be in that group where he coaches. Do you know what I mean? And then it's like, hey, you know, this doesn't work. I don't want you dating him, you know, and yeah, sometimes, I mean, I always say, you know, if you break the rule, you better marry the person. You know what I mean? You know, because you know, I don't want you know, I don't want a serial dater in my gym, whether it's male or female, and, you know, which no
Distraction,
matter
right?
which way it's
Those
going, right?
emotions are a distraction.
Yeah. And you just, you know, you can't, but, you know, at the same time, I look at it and think, hey, if, you know, if 2 people fell in love in my gym, um, you know, would I put up with it? Probably. But, you know, if somebody was, you know, falling in love every other week with a good looking girl or a good looking guy or whatever, then, you know, we'd have to have a conversation about whether they wanted to continue to, you know, to be in our employ. And it's, you know, those are there's just so many things, like you said, and over time, I think you develop more and more rules, and the rules are based on uh, bad experiences, primarily things, you know,
Right.
the things that occur.
Do you when we talk about the young trainers right now, do you think they need more boundaries? They need more rules? Like, how do they develop? How do we as coaches
Yes,
develop
I think they need.
that?
Like I said, I think, like, I would look at it, if I'm you and I'm running Orphic Education, then I'm asking everybody to read How to Win Friends and Influence People.
That's an amazing book. Yeah.
I'm asking everybody to read, you know, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because I think I probably would realize that I need to help you more as a person
Yes.
than as a trainer. Because I think as a trainer, like, I can, you know, we do our CFSC, and it's like, you know, read the book, study the material. You know, I don't think, like, some people find it to be like life-changing, career-changing. I think it's pretty simple. Yeah, we get to give you a really good system. You can follow the system. But as I said, what I can't do is give you the interpersonal skills that are going to make this successful long time. Because think, and you're young, so you don't even remember. But I mean, there was always like that image of like the personal trainer who runs away with the guy's wife. You know what I mean? That's like a standard kind of thing in the movies. You know, where the woman runs away with the personal trainer. You know, that's how we're viewed, as just, you know, some dumb musclehead or some bimbo in the gym who's, you know, looking to break up somebody's marriage, or, you know, some musclehead or some bimbo in the gym who's looking, you know, is just looking at themselves in the mirror all day. Like, that's how people perceive personal training. We need to give them this view of personal training where, you know, we always say, I always tell our coaches, we're in the life-changing business. I want people who work with us to be like, this changed my life. This was, I feel better. I look better. I eat better. All these things are happening positively for me, and not like, oh my God, my arms are huge, or I really like the way my chest looks. You know what I mean? Like I look at that stuff and think, who cares? Like that's to me entirely irrelevant. But I also realize that if you have a good program and you do it well, yes, you will look better.
It'll happen. It'll come.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
I think
But
it's
but it's a bigger piece. It's that kind of, you know, customer service piece that really makes the difference.
And it starts from, like you said, being a kind, nice person. And I think this doesn't get talked about enough. And we talked to Brett Bartholomew just about 2 weeks ago. And it's interesting seeing how successful he's clues. And you can see commonalities in that, all right, mentioning these books on, hey, we're not even looking in the S&C field right now. We're looking at how can we be better human beings. That's person first, athletes that can play last.
Well, it's interesting. If you look at in Brett's book,
Yeah.
Conscious Coaching, I think 5 of the chapters were written by MBSC people.
Well, there you go.
Right? You know what I mean? So,
That's something there.
Kyle Holland wrote one, Brendan Varick wrote one. I have to look back through the book to see
Pretty
who else was.
cool.
Beloka wrote one. But do you know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
think in that way, there's obviously some commonality between, what we're trying to do, and between, I think, that definition. Because I tell people all the time, as a personal trainer, the number one thing that will make you money is people wanting to spend an hour with you.
How do you get that to happen?
Yeah, wanting to spend an hour with you. And you
Right.
get it to happen by caring about them. And that's the ultimate difference. Do you really, when you get that client, because the one thing about personal training too is there's a lot of time to talk, whether you like it or not, and what you choose, where does the conversation go with that person, and knowing, kind of starting to figure out the hot buttons. I had one of my clients who's extremely wealthy, extremely successful, and initially, it was kind of dry in terms of, he'd just come in and he'd do the workout and I'd show him what to do. And it was like, whoa, this is a tough hour.
Mm.
And then we found music. One day, we were working out in this really high-end hotel gym. And I was like, you mind if I put some music on? Because we were getting like the elevator music, that's coming through like in the gym. And he's like, no, I don't mind at all. And he was roughly the same age as me. So I put on like my 60s, 70s playlist. And all of a sudden he perks up and we start talking about music and about songs. And I find out he used to play in a band when he was a kid. He was a bass guitar player, and I mean, we really connected over music. And, that you don't know like what your connection point is going to be. Sometimes it's asking people about their kids. Maybe it's their kids that are really important to them, or maybe it's them wanting to talk about their business, whatever it is. But it's that ability to develop some connection with that client that will make that person a long-term client.
That's a great point. I mean, you the deeper connection that's beyond the superficial. What would you tell a young Mike, a young Mike Boyle, on how to develop those connections, whether it be specific questions to ask or ways to behave, qualities to develop? What do you tell that
I
guy?
think one, I'd probably tell them, do your homework
On the person?
on the person. Yeah. First thing, that's what I do. Like if I had a new client, I'd be trying to figure out, like I always tell people this story, but when I went to work for the Red Sox, I worked for them for 2 seasons and we won the World Series, the World Championship in the second season. And I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm done. But the first year that I was there, I was, I'm a new guy, right? I'm coming in, I'm trying to change the system over. I'm trying to, and I've got to now win over a lot of players, because in baseball, there's a massive number of guys in terms of the number of minor league systems. There's hundreds of players. You've got a 40-man, major league roster, and then you've got another probably 20 guys playing in your top affiliate, and another 20 guys, younger guys playing in the affiliate below them, and 20 more guys in the affiliate below them. It's just a lot of bodies. But every day I read the media guide. Every morning I got up an hour early. So I got up, if I had to be in, let's say I had to be in at 6, whatever it was. At 5, I'd get up and I'd read the media guide for a half hour, 45 minutes. And I'd read about players and I'd read about staff. And Like I was getting as much background information on people as I could get so that when I went in, we could have a conversation about maybe it was where they went to college. You know, maybe I knew their college strength coach. Maybe it was about their kids. Maybe, but in some way I could connect with them with some item of their life. And we always tell them, and with trainers, like I always tell everybody, I tell our coaches all the time, you should text every one of your clients every day. Because they don't know that you're texting every client every day as a matter of course. But if you got a quick text, hey, Alex, you know, just checking in, you know, how'd workouts go? How, you know, whatever, like how was lunch? You know, how was your meeting? You know, like when people text you back, you start to develop that relationship with that person where you're checking in on them and you're not just somebody who pays them for an hour of work.
It's not transactional. It's more.
Right. Exactly. It's not, and that exactly perfect description. It's not transactional. And, you know, you talk about like transactional versus transformational, right? But, you know, we want it to be transformational. We want this to be a relationship where that, like, I always think like the best, you know, trainer client relationship, they start to look at you as a friend, but it's like a friend that you pay to spend time with, you know?
Yeah.
But
It's
that's what
not.
you want. But again, but it's a friend, but it's a good friend. It's a friend that always has their best interest at heart. It's a friend that doesn't feed into their bad habits. It's like, I got to get this really great friend. I got this friend who cares about me all the time and is concerned that I'm eating well and is concerned that I'm getting enough sleep and is concerned, you know, about my family situation and the stressors in my life. You know what I mean? Like that person. And it's funny, you know, now we have people like the life coach crowd, you know, or oh, I'm a life coach. And I look at that and think, you know, some ways I think as a good personal trainer, you probably are a life coach. You're probably helping somebody all the time with, you know, organizing their schedule so they can get their workouts done, helping them with making nutritional decisions. All of these things that you're doing, you really are, in a sense, although I dislike the term, the idea of, you know, what you're really trying to do, you know, versus the personal trainer as like, you know, Marty Musclehead, let's get in and, you know, pump up our biceps today, thing, you know what I mean? Like, I just look at that stuff and think, I can't believe anybody does it anymore. But yet I realize we live in our own little MBSC vacuum.
Bubble.
Yeah. And the reality is 90% of the people are doing exactly that.
I think it's changing. I think guys like you are inspiring the change. I mean, so many like you are inspiring the change. And in fact, just on your point about the, you know, it becomes like therapy and psychology a lot of the times. And like one of my clients just messaged me. She's kind of, that your clients rant to you. They rant to you and they rave to you about, you know, their emotions and how their day's going. And it ends up being like a psychology session. We're not psychologists. We're not psychiatrists. We have no degree or qualification in there. Yet it ends up going there a lot of the times. And you end up realizing that it's less about sets and reps, less about nuts and bolts, and more about the, as you said, connection than anything. And I just wanted to make that comment because it's real.
But like you said, but if you really think, even though you say we're not psychologists, we're not therapists, but when you think, what does a psychologist or therapist generally do? They listen, right? And I think that's the difference. Like when somebody, like I have a very successful doctor client, and, you know, he's one of these guys, he's a super type A guy, has, you know, been extremely successful his whole life, work. And part of my job all the time is to slow him down. You know, I'll have days where I'll look at him and I'm like, Doc, you know, we meet at 5. I still imagine I'm still doing personal training at 5:15 in the morning with a client that I've had for 20 years. But I'll look at him some mornings and I'm like, Doc, you know, how was surgery yesterday? And he'll kind of look at me, do I look bad? And I'm like, yeah, you look like shit. And he's like, oh yeah, you know, I operated till 9 o'clock last night, you know, and then I drove home, ate dinner, you know, got up at 4:30 to get in here to meet you. And I'm like, okay, we're just going to chill today. We'll take our time. We'll warm up. You know, we're not going to push it. And he kind of looks at me and he's like, great. That's exactly what I need. You know, whereas, so instead of me where like, you know, no, let's go. Come on, doc. You know, you got to get a great workout in today. You know, it's being able to look at him and think, no, I always think, you know, my job, he's 70 years old now. And I said, my job is to keep him operating until he's 75. Keep him able to, you know, feeling good, getting up, you know, being able to go to work. And every day is like, you know, the first thing you talk about is kind of the aches and pains thing. You know, how's your shoulder? How do you feel? How's your neck? You know, how's your back? What's going on? And thinking, okay, do we need to spend a, you know, particular amount of time in a particular area? whether it's, rolling or stretching or doing a little bit additional, mobility work, whatever we're doing, but it's developing that ability to read the situation. I think
Yes.
is really critical and it's much like you talked about, even from an information standpoint, it's developing the ability to filter information, as you said, whether it's like me or, you could be an Exos guy, you could be a Mike Boyle guy, you could be whatever. But what you really need to be able to do is, you go back to the Anthony Robbins idea, success leaves clues. And you've got to be able to look and think, can I filter through all this stuff? And it's really hard now because of the internet, a lot of people have developed the ability to con us. Like there's a lot of people who are perceived as experts in our field who aren't. They're experts at being experts.
Hmm.
And that's what they've become. That's where they've made their name. That's what they've become good at. But, and I always think, I said, one of these days I'm going to get old enough where I'm going to really not care. And I'm just going to be like, and I have the list for you right here. These are the clowns who are total frauds and, don't train anybody. But I always tell people, when you're learning to filter, you have to look and think, okay, like if I see this person's videos all the time, whether it's now it's Instagram, Instagram's a big thing.
Yeah.
Are they always by themselves? Like, dude, why do I not see, client videos, athlete videos? Like I love Ben Bruno, and Ben's one of my former trainers who's in California, and he has like a super A-list clientele. Some of whom he really can't, like he actually can't tell you the names of some of his clients because they don't want it out that he trains them, but a bunch of them, also don't care. And, they're in his Instagram videos. He posted Kate Upton yesterday doing like 28 reps with a 28 kilo kettlebell on her 28th birthday, and you're kind of like, that's authentic. Like this guy is training. This is a real person that he's training. And then you see some of these other ones that look like they're produced, in the gym. And it's like, the guy and, one kind of random person doing this thing. And you're like, is this guy really training anybody?
Mm.
If I poked his resume, is there anything in there? And in a lot of cases, there isn't.
And that's, we got to control what we control and, disregard what we can't. But I think that the best way, I think, one of the better things that we can do is lead by example. And I think that's what you've done throughout your career in a pretty powerful way, and you're still doing. I wonder though, you've been decades, Mike. It's been decades. How much do you do differently? How much do you reinvent and change? What sort of improvement can you make at the top of your game now? Is it reinventing? Is it just refining? Where are you at mentally with all
I
this?
think it's much more refining than reinventing. I don't think we're going to reinvent ourselves because I do think our system is really solid.
Yeah.
But I think it's also it's that filtering thing that we talked about. It's figuring out, because there's always new information, right?
Yeah.
It's being able to look at the new information and think, is this useful? Does this make me want to change what I do, even in some small way? Because I can look at, it's funny, someone Instagrammed a picture of my 2004 Functional Training for Sports book and was like, I love this book. And I commented back on Instagram, I'm like, that thing was written 16 years ago. There's stuff in there I don't even believe anymore. You got to pick up the new one. And I'm not trying to sell books, but in 2004, there was no mention of foam rolling because we hadn't even thought about it yet. And it said, don't stretch. I was in the same, static stretching reduces power stage that everybody else was in 2004. And so now I look at our preparation and think everybody foam rolls and everybody stretches. So over, whatever, a 15-year period, there's been a massive shift in how we prepare for workouts. But, if you look at the exercise selection, not so much of a shift. But I always said, if you look, I'm rewriting my second book right now. So it'll effectively become my fifth book. And it's my fifth core training chapter. And it's the fifth different core training chapter that I've written, because we just keep finding out, more and more and more, whether, as I always said, whatever, 15 years ago, it was Australian stuff. It was, Paul Hodges and, draw-ins and, a lot of like Paul Chek kind of influence stuff. And then 10 years ago, it was Stuart McGill and, sort of the kind of, I won't say the no flexion, but sort of an anti-flexion sort of approach, much more, again, a little bit more orientated towards stability. And then now it's even gone a step further in terms of it's very breathing influenced.
Mm.
And so there's always, like you said, refinements that you're looking at and saying, okay, how do I refine this? Is there something better? And I'm a big believer. I always say I'm not married to anything. I'm not going to say this is what we do forever. I'm always going to say this is what we do right now. And, you know, when people ask me what's the best way to do something, like, the way we're doing it now. Because if I thought something was better, I'd switch it.
Right. And you
So
only know until you know to change it.
exactly. And that's why, you know, it's funny because I get accused a lot of being inconsistent, and, you know, people say, oh, he flip-flops all over the place. He's always changing. And I have sort of the standard response. I'm like, that's called learning. And if you're accusing me of learning, then yes, thank you. I'm proud to be accused of learning. I'm very happy you can accuse me of that anytime you want, because I think that's a really good thing. I'd much rather be accused of learning than accused of stagnation.
Mm.
And I think that's the difference for most people, is that I wrote a quote one time. I said, if you're doing the same program you were doing 10 years ago, you either had a really good program 10 years ago or you suck right now. You know, it's like, it's probably an either or thing. So you've got to be able to look at that stuff.
Mike, I want to be respectful of your time. We can either go two ways. I'm really enjoying this conversation. We can either finish off with one last thing, or we can go a little longer if you want or have time.
Probably finish with one last thing, because I do have to get into the gym. I have a group at 8:30, so I'm gonna get off with you, and then I'm gonna go and change my clothes and head to brush my teeth.
Yeah, you got to do that. Otherwise, your wife will be on you. The last thing I want to touch on is biases. You know, how do we learn to detach from our biases? You have every excuse to be attached to your biases, right? You've been decades in the game. You know, you're a older guy in this industry. You're a seasoned veteran. A lot of people could accuse you of staying attached to your biases. To finish off, how do you teach people to detach? How do I not stay so attached as a younger coach in this industry, and not to get so emotionally attached that I don't know how to adapt and change?
I think you have to realize, one, that it's not about you. I think that's the easiest thing. When you again, that's the ego part. When you take the ego part out and realize it's not about you. And because so often I can remember people, when we start talking about change, I can't tell you the number of trainers who said to me, well, I can't go back and tell my clients, you know, that all the core stuff we've been doing was wrong. And I'm like, why not? He said, I do it all the time. I go back and I'm all excited when we make a change and say, oh, you know something? Wow, you know, I just went to this seminar and I listened to this guy, and he's talking about this, and, you know, so we're going to eliminate the flexion stuff. You know, that ends up where you're actually, you know, it's bad for your back, not good for your back, blah, blah, blah. I'm not embarrassed. I always say if you're embarrassed by learning, and that your defense of learning is stagnation and to stay the same, that's a real problem. Like, you'll never be successful at anything if that's the way that you choose to operate. You need to be able to look at things. And again, it goes back to this, it's the selling process. How do I sell the change to my clients when they're so attached to exercise X? And it's developing. And that's why I think I've gotten really good at simple analogies and simple explanations. And I always talk about this, you know, keep it simple, stupid kind of thing, because I've got to be able to explain to a client. And it's that ability to be able to look and say, I was wrong. Is one of my favorite books of the last year was Think Like a Freak. And they say those are the three most difficult words in the English language. Yeah. I was wrong.
You got to be vulnerable.
And whether, you know, that can be in a personal setting, apologizing to somebody, but in our situation, it's in the training setting. Like, hey, I was wrong about that. I learned more. You know, I'm.
Whoop. Where did Michael go? He froze on us. Michael's internet might be out. Uh-oh. Michael Boyle is frozen. It's like someone just pulled the internet connection from his router. Mike, I'm going to stay with it, guys. I'm going to see if he can finish this thought. see if you can finish his thought. I mean, it's just a guy like Mike, you know. Oh,
That
you
was
there,
weird.
Mike?
You were lucky, yeah.
It's like someone just pulled your connection out.
Well, I thought it was like Instagram Live at the end of an hour. Bang, they just knocked
I
it off.
no, it's not for this. It's you want to finish your thought, or do you want to finish there?
I don't know where we lost it.
It
So
was
it's
just 20 seconds ago. The biasy question on how to stay detached from our biases. Finishing off
like,
there.
like I said, I think if you can finish the thought, it's just like I said, it's put your ego away.
Yep.
And make it about the client. Be willing to be weird. I said, I mentioned the book Think Like a Freak.
Yeah.
Be willing to be wrong. Don't be ashamed to be wrong. Don't be ashamed of learning. Don't be ashamed of getting better. Be viewed as somebody who's constantly, I think I'm viewed as someone who's always looking for the best solution for my clients, the best solutions for my athletes. And I think that's why people keep coming back. And so, if you're worried about that, you're worried about the wrong things.
Michael Boyle, honestly, I'm very grateful for a person like you in this industry, and I feel extremely fortunate to have the opportunity to speak to you from all across the world like this. I didn't think this would happen, but it did. If you're ever in Melbourne, Australia, we'd love to host you and run an event and have people learn from you in person like this.
Great. One of these days I'm going to do it.
Have you ever been to Australia?
I've never been. It's funny. I get invited every year by something, but the way my life schedule is, I have two kids, one's playing college ice hockey and another one is playing, high school sports. I don't have the time to make that kind of trek. And I've done China a couple times.
Yep.
Where I've gone over and back, and it beats you up.
It does. But look, if you ever decide to take a family trip out there, we'd love to have you. If not, we'll keep doing this and keep learning from you from afar. Thank you for everything you do, Mike. Really appreciate you.
See ya.
See ya. Michael Boyle, ladies and gentlemen. OG in the industry. Let me put these on. It's 10 p.m. here. Well, enough of this blue light business. So, to finish off, here it is, the webinar Wednesday. This is what we do every week, every Wednesday, usually at 10 a.m. But for this, it was a bit earlier, a bit later, pardon me. Now, as you guys will see, this is at Orphic Education /webinar Wednesday. You can go there to find all information about our upcoming schedule. Matt, we got to do something about this. Don't mind those images. Just check here on the right. You can see exactly the upcoming schedule of who we got. We got another Coaches Roundtable coming next week. It's going to be fire. Let me see. I'll refresh that. Hopefully fix it. There we go. That's better. Another Coaches Roundtable coming next week. Michael Boyle today. A great conversation. Really challenged some previous held conceptions and ideas. He's that type of guy, and it forces you to reflect and think, focus on the basics, and refine. That's next Wednesday, Coaches Roundtable 3. Then we have Darren McInnes, Jacob, Jamie Smith from Strength Culture, and Charlie, which I can't wait for that conversation. I love those guys. Tani Tonkin on the 1st of July. And we got more coming. Stay tuned. If you guys want to keep staying tuned for more of these, you can enter your email name here, and you'll be emailed when the next one is out. Other than that, I'm going to get some sleep, man. It was Orphic Education Webinar Wednesday, available on all podcast platforms, YouTube, Facebook. If you don't know and you want to become a personal trainer, then we have, I believe, one of the best stick at 3s and 4s in the country, the most hands-on, the most practical, and you guys should see what we're creating now. What we're going to come out with will be the most comprehensive piece of education, certificate. I would argue goes even further than a diploma. I'm just going to put that out there. Stay tuned. Orphic Education, Webinar Wednesday. Done.